There's some supermarkets that really went by those strict guidelines as we're only going to sell fresh. Well, nowadays with the freezing technologies that we have now, the fish is fresher than fresh sometimes.
Welcome back to SmarterWellth. This is the podcast where we talk about real life. We talk about real change and how to navigate it all without losing our minds. Hey friends, thank you for joining us in the SmarterWellth Podcast. We are thrilled you're here. This is where we talk about living our life with full intention, where we talk about purpose and we talk about well-being. I'm your host, Jill Hummert, and we are going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to go north. We're going to go really far north, somewhere in Alaska. We're going to talk to our guest today. His name is Tony Woods, and he is a commercial fisherman, and he's the founder of Wild Alaska Salmon Seafood. And he's one of the few people that you're going to meet that knows exactly where your dinner swam before it hit your plate. And this story is not about seafood only. It is about seafood, but there's a lot more to this story. And it's about stewardship. It's about legacy. And it's about reconnecting with the rhythm of nature and how so often today in life we trade convenience for quality. And we want to dig into that. So let's go ahead and get started. Tony, I'm so excited that you're here.
Well, thank you, Jill, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here with you to share the bounties of Alaska and really what's behind everything, that when it arrives in your grocery store, the story behind it all.
Well, let's dig in. So let's just start with your story, because you're not just the founder of this company, but you're out there on the water. You're running the boat, you're catching the fish. You're even running a packaging company and the shipping side of it. So let's start there.
How this whole story began was I was making a career change back in 2001. And I'm a professional pilot by trade, and I was going to fly for the airlines. Well, 9/11 changed my path abruptly, and I decided to commercial fish. And the reason why I saw that opportunity was because no one could get a high quality salmon from Alaska down in the lower 48 in the early 2000s. And so I immediately put two and two together and said, well, if I do this, then, and I bring it to the consumer directly, I can provide them with the best quality salmon that's available. And I really didn't realize the demand for it until I started doing it. And then it really just started snowballing. And it wasn't easy. There's no easy way to do it, but it is it's something that I believe in wholeheartedly, and it's been a great success for me and for the consumers who eat my salmon.
So how did you decide Alaska, in the area of Alaska? What brought you to the place that you currently do live and fish?
Well, that is a great question, because since I was just a little kid, I was always fascinated with fishing. And when I was 17, my parents asked if I wanted to go on a fishing trip to Alaska, which of course I said, of course. And I went up there, and after 3 days, I decided I was going to stay. And so I had my friends send my backpack and tent, and I stayed another 3 weeks after my family left. And I actually hitchhiked around Alaska with $80 in my pocket and fell in love. And that was how I got there. And then the next year, I started working for a lodge as an apprentice pilot and a guide. And that was really the tipping point for me, which I really fell in love with Alaska, the flying of float planes and catching fish. And I thought, you know what, this is the best job in the world. How could that ever get any better? And so I did that through 2000. And that's when I made this career change into commercial fishing. So I went actually from the sport fishing side and customer service side in the guiding industry to the commercial fishing and processing industry, which are completely two different things, but they're in the same area. And so that really is the geographic side of my story of how I got to King Salmon, Alaska, which is the name of the town that I live in. And it is a small community that is 300 miles from the road system. And the only way in is to fly or take a boat. And it's one of the few places in the world, however, you can step off of a jet and be in the middle of nowhere. And so along with that remoteness comes all of the challenges that come along in daily life that you wouldn't ever think of down here.
Sure. That is living into a passion that you gained as a young man, never seeing that this was a future path for a business, right? You started there first because it just felt right and you loved it. And it's interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was very fortunate that I was able to do that, and I would never take those years away as a pilot and a guide when I did that. What I learned and who I met, the places around the world that it took me are just amazing. But the understanding of Alaska and transitioning with weather and the timing of nature and the fish runs, all of that helped me transition into the commercial fishing side. Seeing that connection of the fish with the timing and each month, it's so interesting. Each month up there has a different species of salmon that comes in, and it starts really in June and it rolls all the way through the end of September. And once you start to understand the ebbs and flows of the tides up there and what is going on with the species and the different rivers and the timing, it really helps to have the understanding to then start a business and actually come up with a plan to do it and be successful at it.
So what took you from the decision to sell direct to customer versus a more commercial system, being a part of a more commercial system?
Well, being the fact that I was going back and forth from Alaska to the lower 48 and seeing that demand, and going actually into the supermarkets and seeing the poor quality that was there, and not only poor quality, but just that farm salmon was the dominant thing in the grocery stores. And so I went, wait a second, what we have in Alaska is much better. How can I make that story, be a reality with actually catching the fish, processing the fish, and getting it directly into the customer's hands. And the logistics behind it all is just, it's so complicated. The fish gets touched like 14 times before it ends up making it into the consumer's hand, from when you're catching it on the boat, taking it out of the net, and then the processing of the salmon, and then the freezing of the salmon, the packaging of it, and then shipping, and then packaging it again to then be shipped to the customer. It truly is a just such a complex chain of events that has to happen from the point of harvest to the point where it arrives on the customer's doorstep. And every step is so critical that if a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And so that is, learning it the hard way was the way that I learned it, because there was no roadmap. There was no one else doing what I'm doing. There are only big corporations that are doing this. Harvesting the salmon is left up to the fishermen, but they control the processing that happens. And then they're controlling where and when and how that fish makes it to market. And so by me doing what I'm doing, cutting out the middleman, it was the catalyst to allow me to make it a success. Because just as a fisherman,
Mm-hmm.
your hands are really tied because you have to, sell to a particular processor, and then you don't own that fish any longer. And so by
Yeah.
having owning your own processing plant, it allows me to catch the fish, process the fish in the manner that I need to maintain the quality, and then direct market it directly to the consumer. I've made every mistake there is to make, and here I am now.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning from them all and creating a beautiful process and business through this time that you've been doing it, which
It has been an absolute challenge, and my wife is the key to our success, because I couldn't have done it without her, for sure. She jumped in 2007 with me, and we made it. We made it work.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to the processing piece for just a moment, because that's very important. And any meat processing, seafood processing. So when you're processing it there, where you are 300 miles from other folks.
Correct.
So,
from any of the road systems. So the town of King Salmon and Naknek are connected by a road that's 16 miles long, but that's it. And so everything and everyone that's working out there is flies in for the season. So the population of the two communities there is about 500 people. And then during the summer season, when the fish are running, it booms to about 20,000. And that's all the fishermen coming into Bristol Bay and all of the processors and other people it takes to manage this fishery that happens. Mm-hmm. It's the largest salmon run in the world is in Bristol Bay in June and July. And so this massive amount of infrastructure that's there sits idle for about 10 months out of the year, and then is only active for about 2 months. And so what is the challenge, believe it or not, the real challenging part for quality control starts right at the boat. And it's you're harvesting these fish and then putting them immediately into chilled seawater on your boat. And at that point, then, well, how do you get that fish from your boat to the processing plant? And that is truly the hurdle that's very, very challenging. And so what happens as a normal boat would go, they would catch fish for 6 hours, and then they would go deliver their fish. And they would pull up alongside of a bigger vessel that would have cranes on it, and they would then offload, and they call it boat a tender. And so the tender is there, and they may offload 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 boats at a time. They're big ships. And then they put all that fish into their holds, which have seawater, but then that fish may sit for 24, 48 to even 72 hours before that fish is then taken to a processing plant, and then it's pumped off using fish pumps. Where what I was able to do was pull up to the beach, and I actually use a telescopic forklift to actually pick the fish up in bags out of my boat, put them in my truck, and have the fish delivered right to my processing plant the same day, the same tide. And so by having that freshness, I'm able to process that fish and freeze it literally the same day that it was caught. So it's literally fresher than fresh is the term that I'll use when people say, well, I only like to eat fresh fish. Well, that fresh fish would have been maybe a week old before or longer before it made it from the fishing grounds to the supermarket, let's say in Indianapolis or in Tampa, Florida, or Sacramento. So the seafood has a shelf life when it's fresh, and it's all temperature related. And believe it or not, sockeye is a very durable sockeye salmon. We're talking about one of the 5 species, and sockeye is the species that we're talking about now, is a very durable fish. And I say durable, if you treat it right, it can have a shelf life of up to 14 days, which is, it sounds like a tremendously long time, but that's what it is. If you hold it at 32 degrees, it can last for 2 weeks. Well, what I'm doing is I'm locking that in at day one when I'm freezing that fish. And then so when the consumer gets it and they thaw it out, it's still on day one of that 14-day potential cycle of being fresh. And so, me doing this is totally unique. No one else is doing what I'm doing up there. Everybody else is relying on this traditional tender. Fisherman catches the fish to the tender.
Yeah.
And then the tender brings it to the processing plant. And then the fish may sit at the plant for a day or longer before it's had its turn in the queue to get processed. So that is the chain that's there. The other really important thing is taking the guts out of the fish. That right there, you have the digestive enzymes that are in there. Maybe I'm getting too technical for what people want to hear, but the digestive enzymes that are inside of the belly of a particular species of fish are different. And so a sockeye salmon, because its diet is plankton and krill primarily, has a very low active digestive tract, whereas like a pink salmon or a silver salmon or a king salmon, they're predators and they're eating herring and these other shrimp and fish, and so their digestive enzymes are very, very aggressive. And so if you don't get the guts out of that fish within 24 hours, it's actually going to start to digest itself in there, and the digestive enzymes start to actively work against the fish at that time. And there's many examples of that, like in other seafoods in the lobster industry. Like if a lobster or a crab dies before it's frozen or cooked, it is pretty much instantly, digesting itself. And so it's no good. So the key to quality is timing and handling the fish right from the start. And it's a very challenging thing to do, but if you do it, you do it right, then it gets appreciated down the way.
So to me, the word that just keeps screaming is integrity. Everything you do is integrity first, is what I'm hearing. You're doing
absolutely
it.
Correct. Yeah. And so, and the other, challenge for fishermen as well is, to not overcatch. So if you catch so much fish and your boat can only comfortably hold so much fish, there's a lot of fishermen that will then just keep fishing in deck load, and that'll disrupt the quality as well, because their boat wasn't designed to carry that much fish. But it's the conundrum for the fishermen that doesn't have to sell their own fish to the consumer. All they're interested in is just selling their fish to the processor, where they get the most from the processor. Where my name is on every piece of fish that I sell. And so it matters, and I can guarantee it too, which is really what it boils down to, is the exactly what you said. It's the integrity and the confidence behind every fish. I know it was done the right way, and so I guarantee it.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I don't think that there's many people that can say that, Tony.
No, that's for sure. Yeah, it's a there's a lot behind the curtain, and so much to go into in just this short hour. But I'll be do my best to pull back and let you take a peek behind the curtain as much as possible here.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I'm so interested. Over the years, I've just become so focused on the differences in the quality of our food. I think and I'll speak for myself, but as a younger person, I've always been fairly healthy and interested. But as I've gotten older and cared a little bit more about what I fed my family, when I started having children, that started to shift in my heart and my mind. And so fast forward, I have become very, very focused on the quality of food that we eat and willing to pay a higher dollar for higher quality food. And I'm learning also that you can shop at some of the fanciest stores, and that doesn't mean that the quality of your seafood in this example is what you think it is. And I was shocked, to be quite honest. There's a couple of stores I've shopped at recently or within the last couple of years, and realizing at that moment that they only had farm raised fish. They didn't even offer wild caught. And this is one of the most expensive seafood counters in St. Louis. I was shocked. So, yeah, go ahead.
So what's interesting too, with on a couple of things that you just said, the fact that here you have a supermarket that is supposedly the highest quality around, but yet they don't have, wild salmon available. And that's the other problem with wild species is sometimes they're not available. And, and that's where sustainability, this conversation leads over into sustainability. And so over the last 20 years that I've been fishing in Alaska, I've had 2 years where the run was lower than expected. But Alaska is really the poster child of sustainability. And the models that Alaska uses are now being used in other places in the world because the marine stewardship is it's in our state constitution that every fishery is managed for sustainability, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But so this particular store, they may not have wild sockeye salmon or wild king salmon because it may not be available, or they were discerning enough to where they weren't happy with the quality of what they were getting in that wild category. Where farm raised salmon, as you know, it's Norway is the number one producer. Chile is right behind there, and Canada is another big producer. And so they have these business models where they know that, we're consuming this much, the world is consuming this much farm raised salmon at a time. So it's easy to manage that farm aquaculture because they can have expectations and known shipping routes and all the other things come into it. And then, so what happens if their supply starts to go up? Then they just lower the price. They crash the price, and then they keep up with their volume output. Now, however, the problems they run into with farm salmon is what they're feeding them, because you are what you eat. And they'll even feed these fish, these farm salmon, dye and other colorings to color their meat orange. Otherwise, it would be white or gray. And if you truly ever saw a fish farm and the parasites and the other things that are there in the fish farms, you would never eat a piece of farm fish again. And then there's mislabeling that happens, which is very, very common in seafood in the United States. And you'll have retailers knowing that they can get a premium for a wild caught fish, and they will take a farm salmon and mislabel it as wild caught and get the higher dollar value, purely out of greed. In fact, I've walked into stores myself, and being that I know what I'm looking at, I can spot a fake, and I've called them out on it before. And it's really interesting, the different reactions that I've had from the small business owners and even the big corporations. One of the big corporations actually wrote a formal apology to me, that I got a letter from them. And the small retailer actually ran out the back of the store when I started asking the minimum wage employee at the front of the counter, and the owner of the store heard me calling them out on it. He literally ran out of the back of the store. And
unbelievable.
And people don't realize it actually is a felony to mislabel seafood. Whether there's three things that need to go on all seafood that as a consumer you can keep an eye out for.
Mhm.
Country of origin is a must, whether it was wild caught or farm raised, and then whether or not it was previously frozen or it's fresh. Those are the three mandatory labels that need to be visible on any seafood that's sold in the United States, and that's controlled by the FDA. And
Okay.
yeah, right. And so the FDA also is the one who inspects my processing plant in Alaska. It's not USDA, it's FDA. And, beef and pork and chicken, all those land-based proteins are all USDA, and it's the FDA that does seafood processing plants and regulates
Interesting.
seafood.
Okay. So when you said it has to be labeled fresh or frozen, but if it's in the lower 48, how is it fresh at all?
Oh,
Wouldn't it
well,
all be frozen?
no, depending on the time of
Okay.
year. So, like in June and July, I ship fresh fish right to some of my retailers that are in Atlanta, in the Midwest. I'll just say that in the
Okay.
Midwest is where I ship, and so I will harvest the fish. They'll do the same process: go to the beach, offload with a squirt boom, and bring them to my plant, process the fish, put them into a box with gel packs and a lined box, insulated box, and they're out. Usually within 24 hours of me harvesting that fish, they're in the air and they go to Anchorage, and then they'll get on another flight and go Anchorage to either Chicago and then transfer, or to Atlanta and transfer. So
Hmm.
there's ways to do it. There's always a risk involved when you're shipping fresh fish in July in the United States, because it's
Yeah.
98 degrees on the tarmac. But if you again do it the right way, it's possible. So for
Yeah.
example, fresh fish with the use of airplanes is possible. It's just how fresh is it? And so,
Sure. Very seasonal and very
correct,
seasonal. Yeah.
correct. Now, there are programs that are very successful and great, where the whole fish is frozen, and then what will happen is they will what's called slack out the fish or thaw the fish, and then cut it in the case so it's presented as fresh to the consumer, but it will have to say previously frozen. But that way it's there where you don't,
Okay.
if you decide you're shopping for dinner for tonight, you can go in and buy a piece of this previously frozen fish. And if it's done right, it's very, very hard to tell the difference between something that was fresh and something that was
Hmm.
done right the first time. Because again, once that fish
Okay.
was frozen, it stopped the clock ticking on the amount of time. So hopefully I
Sure.
didn't confuse you too much with that explanation.
No, that's exactly what we needed. I was going to ask you, if I'm standing at the seafood counter and it says they have a farm raised and they have a wild caught, what do our listeners need to look for exactly whenever they are in the counter?
Well, like I was just saying, it's those three things is what the mandatory labels are there: wild caught or farm raised, country of origin, and then
Mm-hmm.
you want to know whether it's been frozen, previously frozen, or it's fresh. And there's some supermarkets that really went by those strict guidelines, as we're only going to sell fresh. Well, nowadays with the freezing technologies that we have now, the fish is fresher than fresh sometimes.
Sure. So, what about color? So, because you mentioned earlier that the different types of salmon have a variability in their color, but if it is a freshly frozen or a fresh piece of salmon, is it naturally going to be a bit redder and not pink,
If
a
it's if
lighter
it's
pink?
sockeye, yeah, if it's sockeye salmon, and so there's 5 different species of wild Pacific salmon, and the ones that you are going to see in the supermarket are going to be sockeye, coho, and each salmon has two names too to really confuse things. King salmon,
Oh,
and then there's Kita or chum salmon is the other name for it, and then pink salmon. Pink salmon is the one that always ends up in a can. You will not
okay.
see pink salmon, fresh frozen. I have seen it, but it's very, very rare. But sockeye is going to be the one that you're going to probably see the most of because it has that brilliant, brilliant, unmistakable deep red color. And so that's why sockeye is also
Mm-hmm.
called red salmon. That's the two names for the sockeye salmon, is
Okay.
sockeye and red salmon. And that's the one that you're going to see. And the sockeye has a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years is the sockeye's lifespan. And they are the cleanest of all of the salmon. When I say clean, because they're not a predator, you are what you eat. And so the sockeye are eating the plankton and krill. So any type of heavy metals or anything like that you would get if you're, let's say, 1,000-pound tuna. That tuna has consumed all these fish over its life, and all of the heavy metals that tuna has
Mm.
consumed over its whole life are in that tuna. Whereas on the sockeye, it has such a short life cycle, and its diet is not a predator. It is, virtually undetectable anything bad in sockeye. It's the cleanest of any of the fish. And the next fish you're going to
Okay.
see is coho, which has a little bit lighter orange, maybe an orange color. And then the king salmon can actually be a multitude of shades of color. So it's kind of hard to, once you get away from sockeye, that one's easy to recognize, but the other species,
Okay.
they're going to vary in color a little bit. And so you kind of have to trust who you're buying from
Okay. That's fair.
to know the difference. If you see,
Yeah.
on the farm raised fish, one thing that is a dead giveaway is what was like when you look at a piece of red meat and you see the marbling, the fat in it. In a farm raised salmon, you're going to see
Mm-hmm.
lots of that marbling in there because they're just feeding those fish, and they actually have cameras in the pens, and they're feeding them until they see food hit the bottom of the pen, and then they shut off the feeder. And they do that every 4 hours, and they have lights on the pens so the fish never sleep. They just keep swimming in a circle and eating and eating and eating. And so they're just full of these, fats, but the balance of fats is not what you would find in nature, and it's actually unhealthy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope I answered your question.
That is fascinating.
The hard
Yes.
part is, the hard part is what do you look for? Well, the sockeye is easy, but and I'm sure that we'll
Yeah.
share some pictures with you that you can show here, and we can give some examples of this once down the road here. And that way, with photographs, maybe your
Perfect.
consumers. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can identify a little bit easier. All right, so let's move into sustainability. So I know we touched on this just for a second, but clearly your company puts a very strong emphasis on transparency, sustainability. So talk to us about the rules and regulations that you find yourself within, but also why you do it happily and why sustainability matters and is such a core part of your mission.
Well, if anybody doesn't think about tomorrow, you're a fool. And that's really the way that I how else can you understand sustainability unless you're thinking about your future? And so, there's that greed factor that comes into play with, with all types of industries around the world, but fishing is so important to manage your fisheries for sustainability. And, the state of Alaska is, and I said this earlier in the show, is really set the bar for the world in sustainability. It's in our Constitution, and it is absolutely, the way that they manage the fishery where we are, which is very interesting itself. Sockeye salmon is the primary fishery that I'm fishing in Alaska, in Bristol Bay. And that fishery is the largest sockeye fishery in the world. About 60% of the world's wild sockeye salmon come from Bristol Bay. So obviously they're doing something right. And
wow.
And so the interesting part about sockeye, and not to dive too far deep into the biology side of it, it's really interesting, but sockeye need a lake. And they're the only species of wild salmon that need a lake. And so the adults swim up the main river into a lake, and then they'll spawn in the lake, or they'll go up above the lake into the small streams in the mountains, and they'll swim hundreds of miles through a river system and spawn within 100 feet of where they were born. And then that fry is born and will live in the lake for 1 year or 2 years. And then they will then go out to sea for 2 years or 3 years. And then they will return, and this cycle repeats all over again. And so, after the parenting stock of all wild salmon, when the parents, after they spawn, they all die. And their carcasses, the energy that's there, the little bugs and the birds and the bears are all there feasting on this smorgasbord of salmon, of dead salmon that's in this ecosystem. And then what's really interesting is the smolt are now feeding on the insects and the things that ate their parents the year before. And so it's this just amazing cycle that happens in this ecosystem. And then when in the spring, when the literally hundreds of millions of these small sockeye are swimming out to sea, they're going down the rivers, and the river that's right where I live, called the Naknek River, the whales are actually coming up into the river and eating these big clouds of sockeye smolt that are heading out to sea. And so like in April and May, you can actually, when the tide comes in, you'll see the beluga whales in there eating these smolt. Well, and then what's really on the dark side of that is the orca whales will then eat the beluga whales when they go out. And that happens every once in a while. You'll see that. So, the big fish eats the little fish. But back to this. Oh my God. So the sustainability. Yeah. So there's this what's called an active management. So these sockeye, once they go out to sea for, they're in the lake for 1 or 2 years and then out to sea for 2 or 3 years, then the component of the parents that are returning is mixed. And so this also helps for sustainability, because you have all these different age fish returning to intermingle and spawn together. And as I said earlier, they'll spawn within 100 feet of where they were born. And so it's, to get really off into the weeds for a second, you have these volcanoes that erupt in our area and will kill a whole river system and acidify a lake for a year, but then the fish come back, and they come back again and again and again. And so this sustainability, this active management that happens is by a tide by tide basis. And so there physically is a tower up each river system with a man with a clicker, a human with a clicker that's actually counting fish. And so they'll get a pulse of, 200,000 fish will get up the river system, and then they'll say, okay, fish for 12 hours. And then we'll fish, they'll record the harvest, and then they'll say, okay, stand down. And then another 200,000 fish will get up the river system. And this happens with each of these river systems. And there's basically 6 major drainages in Bristol Bay that have the headwaters are these giant lakes, which is why Bristol Bay is the sockeye capital of the world. And so this active management, and they want what they want, like up my river, they want between, 1.2 million and 2 million fish for the parenting stock for the future generations. And so, and that is, so the state says when to fish and when not to fish. And so that part there is, embedded into law. But as far as with the other like seafood that I sell, all the sustainability is absolutely, a huge part of the integrity of what we're doing. I am, not going to sell something that is endangered or is on the watch list. And there's different organizations around the world that will certify this fishery or that fishery with a green check mark or or a red X, and say nope, you don't want to eat bluefin tuna from the Mediterranean because they're endangered. And there's a lot of fisheries around the world that have collapsed because of overfishing.
Well, it's really inspiring to hear what you're doing and how Alaska is preserving what they have, and the wildlife that has been so graciously given to us. And it is our stewardship, right, that keeps it healthy and fishable, if that's a word.
Correct.
Is that even a word?
Yeah, absolutely. But the real factor is Mother Nature. Mother Nature really, is the boss. And there's so many factors of just that influence the sockeye mortality, like very, very hard winters, or low water levels make it challenging for the initial hatch of sockeye to come back. There's all these factors that come into play, but the one we can manage is the fishing.
And that goes back to just the rhythm of nature. Like we kind of talked about just for a second in the beginning, is that we can want to do all of these things and push in the need to fish or to produce or to support a business. But if nature is not doing its natural course, it's not going to be there. So learning to have the patience and the fortitude to live alongside her, that is the only way to be able to do it in the right way. It's not going to be good for anybody.
Mother Nature is the boss.
She is, yes. Well, Tony, I would love to jump into what we like to call around here. It's a lightning round of the SmarterWellth three questions that we love to get different perspectives from all of our guests. And you are clearly quite an insightful person, so I'm very anxious to hear your answers.
I don't know if I should be scared.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, it's all good. So give us one thing that you do regularly that you would say supports your wellness or your well-being.
Well, obviously, the obvious answer is I eat seafood, wild seafood, and I eat it probably 3 to 4 times a week. You are what you eat. I've said it before, and everybody should know it. But it comes at about age 40 is when people that's when that little health alarm kicks off. Like in most adults that I know, that they say, okay, I need to eat healthier.
Yeah. Yes. So tell us a belief or a mindset shift that has made a huge difference in your life.
Boy, just work ethic is really something that has, I've been self-employed since I was 22. And, your success is a function of how hard you work, but working smarter and learning from mistakes. Every time you get knocked down, it only makes you stronger. If you learn that pothole in the road is there, you learn to avoid it and not make the same mistake twice. So that's really, a foundational thing that has had, a huge impact on myself. And if there's one thing that I can, tell somebody, especially I have a lot of young people that come up and work for me, is, work ethic, being willing to make a mistake and learn. There are people that
Yeah.
are afraid to even take the first step, and it's okay to fail because you will learn and try until you succeed.
That's right. I love it. It's such a good message. So, given our listeners, I was going to say women, but what we're learning is, believe it or not, we have a fair amount of male listeners as well. So, if you could give the listeners one message that are listening, what would that be?
Oh boy, that's a really broad question there.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Time is short, and do as many things and run through every door and jump through every window that you can, because before you know it, your time is going to be up, and you
Yeah.
want to take advantage of life to its fullest. That is the thing that I have, any opportunity to do something or travel somewhere, go and do it now while you still can, because you never know what tomorrow may bring.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lesson for a lifetime. I love that very much. That's
It's
so good.
with having, I have an 11-year-old son, and I just try to expose him to everything. He has, a passport full of stamps already, and he's traveled all over the world already.
His young years.
And
I love it.
he has that travel bug, and he always wants to know, okay, I want to go here. He wants to go to Dubai and see the tallest building in the world. He wants to go see the pyramids. He has all these aspirations already at 11.
Yeah. I
He
love
wants
it.
he wants to learn to fly airplanes. Just he's really, the exposure to going to Alaska, and he's actually working now in Alaska. He started last year pulling fish out of the nets, and he will be doing it again this summer. And
That's beautiful.
what's
That's
really,
living.
when you ask him, where does food come from? And he understands it comes from farmers and fishermen and ranchers. And that's where all food comes from. It doesn't come prepackaged in the supermarket. And what's really exciting is to see when he pulls the first fish out of the net for the year, and we bring it back to the house and we cook dinner. And I said, you just fed our family. And that smile that gets on his face. And even with hunting, the same thing. We'll go turkey hunting or grouse hunting, and eat what we hunt. And that understanding of, you're feeding our family.
That is growing dignity inside his heart. When you are able to give back to your family in that way, that is growing something deep in him at this very young age, Tony. He is lucky to have you for a father. That is for sure.
Thank you. It's kind of a rite of passage to be able to provide for your family. And once you do that, you feel that it's like the first time you buy your dad dinner at a restaurant. That's a significant moment in every young man's life.
Yes, very true. And lady, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Your parents provide for you your whole life, and then all of a sudden it's your turn, and you can, and you do it. It gives you an uplifting feeling for sure.
It is such a sense of pride, and it does in such a good way. And it makes all of that hard work, it does make it worth it, because you can stand alone. And that's why we do some of this, right? It's why we work so hard.
Absolutely. It's all about the future.
Yeah. Well, Tony, this is such a great conversation. We appreciate everything that you brought today. I love the intention and integrity behind what you're doing, but I also really appreciate the peek behind the curtain and getting to know a little bit more about the process that I don't think many people understand. So thanks for giving us a lot of those details and going there. It's very cool.
It's been my pleasure. As you can see, I have a lot of passion, and I love to talk about it and share those experiences. And I could go on for a long, long time into the weeds about all the minutia that's behind there. But that was a basic summary of what happens up there.
It was a beautiful summary. So if we have a ton of listeners that are clearly anything like us, they're going to be eating fresh salmon from now on, not farm raised if they can stand it. So tell them where they can find you.
So I'm on the internet. I have an e-commerce store. The name of my company is Wild Alaska Salmon and Seafood. And you can go online and shop away and see the beautiful wild caught seafood products that I carry. Of course, including my own sockeye that my son and I catch and process and directly sell to you. So now you know the guy that caught your dinner.
I love it. And be sure to look for the logo with Tony in the hat. That is a clear descriptor that you are in the right place.
Correct. There are several companies with very, very similar names, and there's been some confusion out there, but you will notice with my logo that you are in the right place.
Thank you, Tony. It was great.
My pleasure. An absolute pleasure this afternoon visiting with you guys.